Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm honored to be part of this group. We have with us at the table here some of the leading think tank and research personalities in the Arab world. I think in the audience as well we have quite an impressive group of Arab researchers and thinkers and analysts who would compete well and hold their head up high anywhere in the world, and they do in Paris and Harvard and London and other places all around the world. We have people of the highest international quality working in respect of the realm of research and analysis and think tanks in the Arab world. The question is, why have these institutions had such a limited impact over the years, and what has their impact actually been? We've been studying this question for the last 4 years at the Paris Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs, because when we started our role, when we were founded and established in the American University of Beirut, the idea was to harness the research done by 650 very high-quality professors at AUB who were constantly generating research, to harness that knowledge and somehow channel it to policymakers and harness other knowledge all across the region and try to get it into the hands of policymakers so that policymakers can make better policies across the Arab world. And when we started to do that, we realized that nobody had ever studied this question. Nobody had any idea about how does policymaking make use of research and knowledge within the Arab world, and how do people who generate knowledge and advocate for policy changes, whether academics or think tanks or research centers or others, how do they, or NGOs, how do they penetrate the policy-making systems? How do they get their knowledge and their ideas into the policy-making system? Nobody had ever studied this in the Arab world, and we decided that that really had to be our first mission in figuring out how we can bridge the gaps between research, knowledge, advocacy, and policy making. So we spent 4 years working on this is a permanent program. It's not a 2-3-year project. We've been working on this for decades to come. We hope it's the central issue of what we want to do, which is to bring together research and policy making in a more structural and more systematic manner. So we've held many workshops and meetings and interviews and research projects, and the first booklet, the first synthesis of our research will be coming out in probably 3 or 4 weeks from now, that captures all the knowledge that we've had from our 4 years of work. And I will just share with you a few of the main findings. We have with us Farah Yahya is from the Paris Institute. She's the project manager for this work, so she's here. She'll be here for the next 3 days, so you'll be able to exchange ideas with her as well. The basic lesson I think that we've learned about policy making and research and the role of think tanks is that in many ways the think tank and research world mirrors the political culture of the Arab world, where there is lack of clarity, lack of mandates, erratic quality, unclear legitimacies, and perhaps largely inconsistent application of the transfer of knowledge from the people who produce knowledge to the people who can use it. We have compiled a searchable database which will be on the web probably in the next week or so. We're just doing the final touches to it. I think we have around 205 or 210 institutions that we've identified, and we've sorted them out into different categories, and we're doing analysis on this database, but it will be available for everybody to access on the web. And some of the lessons we've learned are that the people who generate research in the Arab world often bridge the gap between those people who do original empirical research who really generate knowledge, and those people who do analysis, and those people who do opinion. That there's this continuum of knowledge, analysis, and opinion, which is often fudged none of these institutions, people like us and many of us here in this room, none of us have a formal mandate from our societies to do what we do. We have self-selected this work because we think it's important, we think it's interesting. But nobody has officially given us a mandate to do this. And very few institutions in the Arab world have earned the credibility that is required to be taken seriously by governments. And not just by governments, also by the private sector, or by foreign donors, or international agencies, or educators, or civil society. It's not just the governments who make policy, many others do that. But very few of the think tanks have earned real credibility and legitimacy, partly because very few of them have devoted the resources and the time to focus on a few areas of expertise year after year where they develop that unique expert body of knowledge that is at once deep and credible and scientifically credible, so that governments know to turn to them when they need information about the environment, about taxation, about education reform, whatever it may be. One of the weaknesses of think tanks is they keep changing the areas in which they work, partly because of what's legally and politically permissible in their society, sometimes what's culturally, religiously, socially permissible as well. They keep changing the topics they deal with, so you don't get institutions that deal with one issue for years and years in a row, and that reduces their credibility. And governments, when they need information suddenly, they don't find it easily within their own societies often, and therefore they find it much easier to get money from a foreign donor, to bring in a foreign consultant, or to go to the UN, or to go to the EU, and ask for a study, which is usually done by a foreign consulting firm, which usually comes back to talk to many of the people in this room to get the information they need. So the knowledge is available in our societies. It's just not packaged or parked in an institution where it is readily accessible. One of the things we discovered also is that there is no systematic contacts of any serious kind between researchers and policymakers. There simply is no regular interaction. Researchers mostly have no idea what one of the positions they're dealing with at a certain moment in time. And if they do, it happens to be simply by some serendipitous personal interaction. People know each other, they have dinner together. But there is no systematic manner in which researchers and government policymakers interact so that researchers can know what the government is working on and what information it needs. And government people can know what policy, what research they're doing, and what's available to them, what knowledge is available to them in their societies. The entry points into policy making for researchers are quite unclear. And it's one of the things we started to study through our policy tracing studies we started to do in London, and now we're expanding around the region. To take a policy decision and trace it back by interviewing people, by doing analysis of the literature, the documentation, and to understand how the policy was actually made, who were the key players, what was the interaction among political NGOs, civil society, and others, where were the entry points for knowledge if it was used in helping to create policies, and therefore clarifying the entry points. Where do you go with knowledge? If you have information about a certain field, say environmental protection or gender equality legislation or any issue, you go to the president, you go to the king, you go to the prime minister, to a minister, to the parliament. Where are the entry points? So these are some of the things that we're trying to understand. The strengths of the research centers and think tanks, we call them policy research institutes, PRI, policy research institutes is the term we're using. The strengths are that they're very agile, they're mostly independent, they can pretty much choose whatever they want to do. They're usually quite courageous and bold, they're not afraid to tackle sensitive issues, and they have some outstanding individual researchers, and they can produce very high quality work. And there have been cases, and quite a few activities are documented now, where think tanks and policy research institutes produce knowledge which clearly impacted the making of laws. This country here, much of the environmental legislation that came out of the research and the sector, and the status of women in many countries, no smoking legislation, and other issues like this, decentralization. A lot of these sense is that, and we've held several workshops with think tanks from all over the region on this, our sense is that the think tanks now have a major opportunity. This is what think tanks are telling us around the region. We have an opportunity to translate into policy terms the emotional, political, ideological ideas, grievances, aspirations that are expressed by millions and millions of citizens. Those crowds that we see on TV in Egypt and other places, the people in Syria who are fighting, the people in Bahrain who are marching, everywhere in the region, this indomitable, extraordinary human determination among tens of millions of Arab men and women, ordinary people, to fight for their rights, to affirm their dignity, to manifest their humanity, and most of all, to achieve their citizenship rights. That indomitable force that has been expressed over and over and over again for the last 30 months. We need to understand that not in emotional terms, not in political terms, but in policy terms. What is the problem, and what do these citizens need? The role of think tanks today can be to translate that into policy options, policy alternatives, and the understanding of citizen-driven demands. We've launched two projects, one on dignity and one on social justice, in which we work with research in 5 or 6 Arab countries to understand what do Arab people, young people especially, what do they mean by dignity? Dignity and social justice are the two most commonly used terms in the last 2 years and a half. But we don't clearly understand what they mean. So this is one of the ways we think we can play a role with our colleagues. We work with colleagues all over the region, academics, universities, research centers, NGOs, to understand what does dignity mean in its components. What does social justice mean? And therefore this knowledge, if we generate it, which we will, we give it to governments, we give it to donors, we give it to civil society and educators. How can that knowledge be used then to address the issues that matter to citizens, so that the policy-making system can function coherently, and rather than remain at the whim of individual officials who are neither accountable to their people, nor do they consult their people very much. So I think this is a historic moment when policy institutes and research centers can really play a critical role in bridging the gap between the powerful, the historic sentiments that people have expressed all across the Arab world, and the pressing, urgent needs of new governments, as we see in Tunisia, Libya, Yemen, Egypt, to come up with more efficient, practical policy alternatives. So the two issues that matter to governments are the same two issues that matter to think tanks: legitimacy and efficacy. They have to be seen to be legitimate, and they do that by being efficacious, by being able to produce results that are relevant to people's lives and that can be practically applied in real terms, not idealistic emotional ideas, but real practical ideas that can be implemented on the ground and that improve the lives of ordinary people. Governments face this challenge, face this challenge, and I think this is a historic moment when all of us need to work together much more closely to be able to live up to those challenges and those opportunities. And then one last point, it's very difficult to create networks of institutions like this. I think we should talk less of networks, talk more of collaboration, consortiums, alliances, ad hoc relationships. It's very hard to create a formal network, but there needs to be a lot more exchange of information. And we're trying to play our role as South Institute that University to consult regularly with colleagues around the region and to study these issues together so that we can all have a better understanding of how we can finally live up to our promise of being effective agents of research and change, just as tens and tens of billions of our citizens are trying to live up to the reality that they face, which is to be full citizens